Where two or three are gathered in my name, there am I in the midst of them, says Jesus, which is wonderful, such a wonderful promise that Christ can be present with us here and now. The only difficulty is the other two or three. Sadly, to have Christ present among us, we need to be present together. Churches and people at all times and in all places find it hard to get on with one another. And our readings today make it clear that it's difficult to live together. But this is good news, everyone. It's good news that from the very, very beginning, neither the church nor its members were perfect, and they disagreed continually, as we continue to do today. We look at our own lives, we look at our families, our neighborhoods, we look at our nation, we look at our international scene, and we see every minute of every day people failing to get on together. Today's readings are also about how we are responsible for one another and how we continue to be responsible for one another even when we fall out, whether we like it or not, whether we like each other or not. We are responsible for one another because we are called to love one another. Now, it doesn't sound hard, does it, to love one another? And yet we're told it's not something we get to choose. We don't get to bestow love on one another when we like each other and we're getting on with each other. It is rather a strict obligation that we owe to each other, irrespective of any difficulties that have arisen. It's required. We owe it. We owe it as a debt. It's not a gift we give, it's a debt we owe. Fortuitously, for people such as myself, who can be a real pain in the arse and difficult to get along with, and also for some of you who similarly can be a pain in the arse and not always easy to get along with, this does not mean we have to like each other all the time, and it definitely doesn't mean we have to agree with each other all the time, which is a bit of a relief. Our readings reveal that right from the very, very beginning, there was tension in the community between our calling to love one another and our complete inability to get on with one another. And it's good to know that we're not failing to love each other when we disagree. We're not even failing to love one another when we wound one another, because this is an inevitable fact of life. Just by mixing together, rubbing alongside one another, we will wound each other intentionally and unintentionally. This is not failing to love. What is failing to love is having recognized that wound, failing to seek with all our will to mend that relationship. This is why our gospel instructs us to keep talking. Jesus tells us to do the opposite of what we usually do when we've been wronged by someone, because he says, go and speak directly to them. Instead, we mainly speak to one or two others, or maybe 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 others who are likely to take our part in it. When we're wounded, our primary concern is to lick our wounds and to assure ourselves of the support of others and to justify ourselves and prove that we were in the right. And that is normal. But Jesus says that doesn't matter. None of that matters. The only thing that matters is attempting to restore the relationship with the person who has hurt us, because we owe one another a debt of love. And the language of debt and forgiveness is important in the Gospels. In Jesus' time, debt was common. It was a way of life. It was the way society worked, by getting indebted to one another and owing one another favors. But it was also life-threatening, as it can be today, because it brought about loss of land, loss of livelihood, and loss of place in the community. To become completely indebted meant you lost your status as a human being, and you essentially became a chattel owned by the person you were indebted to. If someone's debt is forgiven, they are restored to their place in the community. They become an equal again. And so it is with love. If we love someone when they wrong us, our obligation is to set them back on a status of utter equals with us and to mend that relationship. To be honest, I find today's readings at first sight, they're a bit preachy and they're a bit judgy. If I say to the wicked, "Oh, wicked ones, you shall surely die," and you do not speak to warn the wicked to turn from their ways, the wicked shall die in their iniquity. But their blood I will require at your hand. So this idea that we somehow have an obligation to point out the faults and sins of others doesn't sit well with our individualism and our mind your own business attitude in society. But that being said, we are judgmental. It's just making it obvious that that's what we do. We judge continually. The readings make it clear that as we judge, so we are responsible. Ezekiel makes it clear, their blood I will require at your hands. Somehow, if somebody else does something wrong, and we say you've done something wrong, we don't say you've done something wrong, we are responsible for their sin. That idea, which we find so alien to our modern sensibility, that we really are all in it together, that we sink or swim, we build or destroy, we create heaven or hell here on earth together as a community. It's not, salvation is not a solo pursuit. We have power. We just don't like to admit it. The gospel makes this really clear. You have the power to loose or bind. You have the power to retain sins or forgive them. Don't make out that this is a power you don't have, and don't use already to either the building up or the breaking down of the bonds among you. You already use that power. You already use it to judge others and dismiss others and treat them as less than equals, to make decisions about their actions and their behavior. Own that power and use it for good. When Jesus tells us that we have the power to loose and bind, he is not saying that somehow we're right. He's not saying that somehow the decisions we make are perfect decisions and that's why we have that power. He's saying the real and practical impact of your actions will loose or bind people. They will set them free or they will constrain them. That choice is ours. Do we pretend we don't have the power? Do we claim the power for our own and use it as well as we can and allow others to use that power over us? When we choose to forgive, when we choose to love, when we choose to be forgiven and to be loved, we become the place where Christ can be present. We become the 2 or 3 gathered in his name, struggling to understand the wrongs and rights of situations and the way forward, but committing always, always, always to staying connected. You lot are a bunch of difficult people. And I am a difficult person. And community is hard, hard work. But I'm afraid to say it is the place and the only place where Christ is found. If we did not have one another, we would not have Christ in our midst.